Good afternoon. I'm Paul Hines, pastor here at First Presbyterian, and on behalf of the Jefferson Interfaith Action Coalition, we welcome you to this vigil on gun violence. Jefferson Interfaith Action Coalition is a big official sounding term for a small group of people that represent a number of different communities of faith and traditions in our community that are getting together to work on some issues of justice and peace. And so we feel called to put together this time together. So we're glad that you are here as we wrestle with the reality of gun violence today and around us. We hope that it is a meaningful time for you. We intend for this to be an interfaith time. There are some Christian symbols around here. We pray that you will just feel free to be wherever you are, that your work, your spiritual walk, is your spiritual walk, and we honor that we gather together as human beings. And that when we hear and use God language in our prayers, we pray and invite you to envision whatever spirit, whatever power, whatever image of God you have, and that is appropriate for you and in your experience. We gather together as human beings this afternoon, and we join together in one spirit. Just a couple of notes about our service. We have a couple of songs that we invite you to sing together. The words are in your program. We realize that not everyone may know the tune, but Elizabeth is going to sing the first verse of each song, and then just try it in if you don't know it. Let it sing. And so we'll do it that way, and just pick it up as you can, as you feel comfortable or called. And at the end of the service, after that final song that we'll sing together, you'll be invited to come forward, and I will light the first candle here at the bottom, and you just take these long sticks, and you can light this from one that is lit, and then light another candle that is unlit. And then you can put it right in the sand, and it will douse the flame if you're not familiar with that. For now, I invite you, wherever you are, to breathe deeply, to center yourself, to feel the presence of our siblings, our human siblings around us in this moment, your neighbors, to feel the presence of all those who mourn, all those who wrestle with the reality of gun violence and its outcomes. That you feel the presence of this spirit that binds us together. And as we breathe, may we strengthen that connection. And may we join together in love. Welcome.
who was a poet of a Spanish poet of the late 1800s and into the period of the Spanish Civil War. The wind, one brilliant day. The wind, one brilliant day, called to my soul with an odor of jasmine. In return for the odor of my jasmine, I'd like all the odor of your roses. I have no roses. All the flowers in my garden are dead. Well then, I'll take the withered petals and the yellow leaves and the waters of the fountain. The wind left, and I wept, and I said to myself, what have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you?
Hello. I'm Michelle Sandoval, and I was asked to participate in this lament. And it's hard for me to feel very wise about any words that I can express. I will say, admittedly, embarrassingly, about maybe 3 years ago, I stopped reading the news. And as a person who's always been politically involved and tried to make a difference, it's embarrassing. But I decided I couldn't take it anymore. Everything was so sad. I go by flags at half-mast, and there's no, I think, oh, now what? It's always something. How many more people have been killed? How many children are dead? America has such blood on its hands that, I tried to back out of seeing the news because I was just getting angry and angrier and angrier, and I knew that's not going to solve any problems. But neither has stopped watching the news. I think about Uvalde because it's a town that's, people said it was a small, safe town. People knew each other. They knew the person that murdered the kids and the teachers. He was part of the community. And I think that often when a tragedy strikes like these mass shootings, 692 of them last year, 250 of them so far this year, we always forget the shooter. And so many of these mass shootings have been by young assailants now. And of course, there are children as well. But I think about Uvalde because it's about 16,000 people. Port Townsend is about 10,000. And we recently had a death, not by gun violence, but by drugs, of family friend, a community member, a family that was loved and well known. And every time I thought of him, think of him, this young man of 23, I can barely breathe for the parents. And so I think about these 19 kids who were in the 4th grade, 9 years old. When I was 9 years old, that's when I fell in love with Robert F. Kennedy. That's when I started to become politically aware, was when I was 9 years old. Robert F. Kennedy was killed. Martin Luther King was killed that year. My grandmother died that year. It was a big year for me in 1968 when I was in 4th grade. But after Sandy Hook, when 20 kids under the age of 8 were killed, I sort of gave up hope for America. Ever changing, ever getting rid of the love of money over people, the love of guns over our children. I'm scared for an entire generation of children. I'm sad when my son, who's 30, tells me there's so much terrible things going on in the world. He doesn't want to have children. So I don't have any wise words. This is definitely just a lament. I will say that yesterday in the grocery store, just thought came to me as I was putting up the groceries on the conveyor belt. What if somebody came in and just started shooting up this place? It was the weirdest thought. I've never thought that before. And obviously, in Port Townsend, we don't tend to worry about things like that. So we're sort of removed. But I think it's important for us, it's important for me to try to stay engaged. I looked up how to change the world on Google. Number one thing said, vote. Second was give money. Somewhere down the top 10 was run for office. Well, I've done all of those things, and it's not working. So I think we need to do more. I would just say, when you're watching your favorite program next time, and if it's an hour long, think about the fact that there were kids in that building that nobody entered for 78 minutes. And how the trauma of that time will ever leave their lives. The generation of children who will be scarred for their entire life. We just keep perpetuating the people that want to pick up a gun. I've thought about that for years, the 20 years that we were in war, the generation of people that we have completely ruined. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm sorry I don't have any wise words. But vote. Run for office. Give money. Thank you.
Lord, take this badge off me. I can't wear it anymore. It's getting too dark to see. I must be knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. And knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Lord, these guns have caused such pain. We will never be the same. Please, Lord, never again. We ask you, please, Lord, never again. Put these guns in the ground. I can't touch them anymore. It's time to pass some love around. Soon we're knocking on heaven's door. Sing with me, please. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. We are knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, 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 knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. So many stars have appeared. When their message is quite clear. Just let the children play. We gotta let the children lead the way. But they ain't children anymore. They were knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Please, no more. Knock, 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 knocking on heaven's door. We are knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Just knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door.
Thank you for the beautiful music, and thank you for the beautiful silence. Clowns, court jesters, and comedians can tell hard truths through satire and humor, sarcasm and wit, in ways that cuts through the silence and allows us to detect vital signal. When we laugh and when we nod, often in disbelief at our own willful ignorance and our own prejudice, our hearts and our minds can crack open a little bit, and we can think and we can feel in different ways, other than our rutted, regular, daily, habitual consciousness. Now, confronting brutal topics with humor is especially fraught, and the satirical newspaper The Onion knows this all too well. Over the decades, they have mastered a style and a presentation that is clarion signal. In case in point, the following headline was large and bold and unignorable 8 years ago, after a mass shooting in Isla Vista, California in May 2014. No way to prevent this, says only nation where this regularly happens. Now, the short article ran 200 words and reads as follows. Isla Vista, California. In the days following a violent rampage in Southern California, in which a lone attacker killed 7 individuals, including himself, and seriously injured over a dozen others, citizens living in the only country where this kind of mass killing routinely occurs, reportedly concluded Tuesday that there was no way to prevent the massacre from taking place. Quote, "This was a terrible tragedy, but sometimes these things just happen, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop them," said North Carolina resident Samuel Whipper, echoing sentiments expressed by tens of millions of individuals who reside in a nation where over half the world's deadliest mass shootings have occurred in the past 50 years, and whose citizens are 20 times more likely to die of gun violence than those of other developed nations. Quote, "It's a shame, but what can we do? There really wasn't anything that was going to keep this guy from snapping and killing a lot of people if that's what he really wanted." At press time, residents of the only economically advanced nation in the world, where roughly 2 mass shootings have occurred every month for the past 5 years, were referring to themselves and their situation as, quote, "helpless." A little over a year later, the exact same headline ran in The Onion, and it was large, and it was bold, and it was unignorable after the mass shooting in Charleston, South Carolina. "No way to prevent this," says only nation where this regularly happens. And underneath the headline, the same article ran. The same article as the year before, with the only relevant details changed was place, number of dead, number of injured, and a photo of the new shooting site. The same headline and the same article ran again after the mass shooting in Roseburg, Oregon. "No way to prevent this," says only nation where this regularly happens. Again, after the mass shooting in San Bernardino, California. Again, after the mass shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada. Again, after the mass shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Again, after the mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. Again, after the mass shooting in Santa Fe, Texas. Again, after the mass shooting in Bakersfield, California. "No way to prevent this," says only nation where this regularly happens. Again, after the mass shooting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Again, after the mass shooting in Thousand Oaks, California. Again, after the mass shooting in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Again, after the mass shooting in El Paso, Texas. Again, after the mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio. Again, after the mass shooting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. "No way to prevent this." Again, after the mass shooting in Atlanta, Georgia. Again, after the mass shooting in Boulder, Colorado. Again, after the mass shooting in Indianapolis, Indiana. Again, after the mass shooting in San Jose, California. Says only nation where this regularly happens. Again, after the mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. Again, after the mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. No way. No way. No way. Again, after the mass shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Again, after the mass shooting in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Again, after the mass shooting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the city of brotherly love where my queer daughter lives. No way. Prevent this. No way. Prevent this. No way. Prevent this. Amen.
We lived happily during the war, a poem by Ilya Kaminsky that I'm going to read twice. And when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Invisible house by invisible house by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th month of a disastrous reign in the house of money, in the street of money, in the city of money, in the country of money, our great country of money, we, forgive us, lived happily during the war. And again, with a few changes to adapt it to our current topic. And when they killed other people's children, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Invisible school by invisible school by invisible school. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. After long years of a disastrous reign in the house of money, in the street of money, in the city of money, in the country of money, our great country of money, we, forgive us, lived happily through the slaughter.
when you're broken down and tired. Oh, living life on the merry-go-round and round. It seems you can't seem to find a fighter. Oh, but I see it in you, and we're gonna walk it out and move mountains. We're gonna walk it out and move mountains. Ooh. And I'll rise up, rise like the day, and I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid, and I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the waves, and I'll rise up, oh, in spite of that ache, and I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, oh, for you. When the silence isn't quiet, oh, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe, and I know you feel like dying. Oh, but I promise, we're gonna bring the world to its feet and move mountains, and move mountains. Oh, we're gonna bring the world to its feet and move mountains. And I'll rise up, rise like the day, and I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid, and I will rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, oh, oh, for you, for you. All we need is hope. And for that we have each other. And for that we have each other. And we'll rise. And we'll rise. Oh, we will rise. We will rise. And I'll rise up. Rise like the day, and I'll rise up. Oh, in spite of that ache. And I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And we will rise up, rise like the day, and we'll rise up. Oh, in spite of that ache, and we'll rise up. We'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, all the children. For you, for you.
Like Michelle, I'm humbled and don't have, I feel, any words of wisdom. But I'll just share. In 2013, a previously unknown poem of Carl Sandburg was discovered. It's not certainly known when it was written, but he died in 1967, so it was written sometime before that. Its words spoke to me for this moment. Here's what he wrote. Here is a revolver. It has an amazing language all its own. It delivers unmistakable ultimatums. It is the last word. A simple little human forefinger can tell a terrible story with it. Hunger, fear, revenge, robbery hide behind it. It is the claw of the jungle made quick and powerful. It is the club of the savage turned to magnificent precision. It is more rapid than any judge or court of law. It is less subtle and treacherous than any one lawyer or 10. When it has spoken, the case cannot be appealed to the Supreme Court, nor any mandamus, or any injunction, nor any stay of execution in, and it can interfere with the original purpose. And nothing in human philosophy persists more strangely than the old belief that God is always on the side of those who have the most revolvers. Here is a revolver. It has an amazing language all its own. We know that today, don't we? It's not only in mass shootings, but in situations of domestic violence, in religious rhetoric, and the rhetoric of my own tradition that twists a faith of peace into a religion of violence, with depression and suicide. Today, the language is dominated by a different dialect, perhaps, AR-15, but the language of the revolver still speaks deafeningly. It has in my own life. I always weigh carefully or haltingly or stumble around, weighing heavily whether to share this or not, my story, but the language of guns speaks so loudly today that our stories, our real stories, must be told. The weekend of November 4 through 6, 2016, hope I can make through this, was a great weekend for the Hines family. Our son Eric and daughter Lydia were both home, joined by Lydia's boyfriend, now fiancé, Jacob. And on that weekend, we went for walks outside. We walked along the beach. We cooked together, ate together, watched TV together. We laughed together around the dinner table. I was encouraged. On Sunday evening, Lydia and I made plans to visit with Eric the next day to go see a movie with him that had just come out. I can't remember what it was. I was sitting on my bed doing something, engaged with something, when Eric came into my room to say goodbye. I gave him a big hug and told him that I loved him and that I would see him tomorrow. Each hug and each goodbye had become precious because Eric had wrestled with depression for a long time. He had attempted to take his life a few times, unsuccessfully. Unbeknownst to me, shortly after his 21st birthday, Eric had purchased a 5-shot revolver, brand new, which spoke its language only once. And it told a story that I can only begin to talk about. And there is not a day in the last 2,050 days that story hasn't cast a dark shadow on my own. The story told by little human fingers on triggers pierces us, our hearts, our souls, and into tragically, many of our bodies, young and old. This afternoon we mourn, we grieve, we wrestle, and wonder how the story will end. It is the last word, Carl Sandburg wrote. May it not be so. May it not be so. May we dare to tell our stories, and in the telling may we wrap our arms around each other to comfort each other. May we dare to tell our stories so that we don't forget. May we dare to tell our stories so that we can gain a deeper understanding of the many layers to them: isolation, alienation, political extremism and polarization, profit, mental health, racism, hatred, fear, and the common good. May we tell our stories, and in the telling, may we begin to write. May we dare to write so that the last word of the revolver becomes the first word of new chapters. Different chapters, different outcomes. Chapters where we give weekends and embraces back. I don't know if stricter gun laws would have saved my son's life. He was determined. I do know that he wasn't successful in taking his life until he held a gun. I don't know if his life would have lasted much longer with more common sense gun regulation, but I do know that the age limit of 21 years to buy one gave me more time with Eric. It gave me that weekend and that last embrace. I do know that love, the love of the people here in this church and around us, the Hines family, have shown me that the last word isn't written. So may we write. May we tell, and may we write. Amen.
Following the shooting in Uvalde, Texas, poet Amanda Gorman wrote this. Hymn for the Hurting by Amanda Gorman. Everything hurts, our hearts shadowed and strange, minds made muddied and mute. We carry tragedy, terrifying and true, and yet none of it is new. We knew it as home, as horror, as heritage. Even our children cannot be children, cannot be. Everything hurts, and it's a hard time to be alive, and even harder to stay that way. We're burdened to live out these days, while at the same time blessed to outlive them. This alarm is how we know we must be altered, that we must differ or die, that we must triumph or try. Thus, while hate cannot be terminated, it can be transformed into a love that lets us live. May we not just grieve, but give. May we not just ache, but act. May our signed right to bear arms never blind our sight from shared harm. May we choose our children over chaos. May another innocent never be lost. Maybe everything hurts, our hearts shadowed and strange, but only when everything hurts can everything change.
Please join me in reading the litany by reading the bold. Giver of life and love, you created all people as one family and called us to live together in peace. Surround us with your love as we face the tragedy of gun violence. For children and adults who have been killed, wounded, and traumatized, for grieving survivors, and for those known to you alone, make us instruments of your peace. Our leaders have been given power and responsibility to protect us and lead us. Strengthen their devotion to our common life and give them clarity of purpose, especially for the sake of those most vulnerable. For all who bear such responsibility, for all who struggle to discern what is right in the face of powerful political forces, make us instruments of peace. God of compassion, we give you thanks for first responders, those whose duty bring them to the streets, schools, public spaces, and homes where the carnage of blood violence takes place every day. Give them courage and sound judgment in the heat of the moment, and grant them compassion for all, especially the most vulnerable. May the institutions charged with the public good reflect justice and love. For all who risk their lives and serenity as they rush to our aid, make us instruments of peace. Bind up the wounds of all who suffer from gun violence, those injured in body and heart, those left alone and grieving, and those who struggle to get through one more day. Be with those who are overwhelmed, enraged, frustrated, and demoralized by the plague of gun violence. Give them a sense of your presence and plant in them a seed of hope. For all whose lives are forever changed and broken by the scourge of gun violence, and for those who despair, make us instruments of peace. For those who have died in gun violence that we have allowed to become routine, may they be remembered. May they be cherished. May we give thanks for their lives taken too soon. God of tender mercy, Spirit of truth and justice, may we all find your voice, our voice. Turn us from the altars of violence. Give us courage to protest the needless deaths caused by gun violence and work for peace. Help us rise above our dread that nothing can be done, and grant us the conviction to advocate for change. For your dream of a world where children are safe and all of us live together without fear, make us instruments of peace.